A lot of people have a lot of things to say about Odell Beckham Jr. I mean, even if choosing the Cleveland Browns might have been the wrong decision, which I don't think it is, I still think Odell Beckham Jr. is one of the league's most elite wide receivers, and I'm gonna get into that in a little bit. But in the meantime, it is Monday, July 13th, 2020. Here in this quarantine, I'm James Sims, and no, without further ado, I'm really gonna get into Odell Beckham Jr. He's one of the most elite wide receivers that I've seen. He's had a bit of a fall off, but that doesn't mean he's no longer elite. I don't even think he's been a Pro Bowler the last 3 seasons, but I still think that what he's got, I mean, he's still an elite receiver that should be respected for the talent that he is. Just to give you a little bit of background, Odell Beckham Jr. is a 27-year-old wide receiver playing with the Cleveland Browns. He stands at about 5'11", 198. He's incredibly quick. He's very fast. He's very shifty. And if you know anything about Odell Beckham Jr., you know he has really good hands, really big hands. He catches a lot of impressive balls. If you remember Odell Beckham Jr.'s rookie year catch against the Cowboys where he caught it one hand, that was him. And even right then and there, people were starting to recognize him as probably one of the best receivers to come through, especially at such a young age. But like I said, I'll give you a little bit of background. So of course he came up through Louisiana, went to high school in New Orleans. He was eventually recruited to go play football at LSU with Les Miles his first couple of years. And of course he went out there his first season under Les Miles. The LSU Tigers ended up losing in the national championship game. But I mean, Odell, as a freshman, he played all 14 games. He finished with 41 receptions, 475 yards, 2 touchdowns. Not really doing much. As a sophomore, kind of the same deal. 2012 LSU finished 10-3, losing, or they won, or they lost in the Chick-fil-A Bowl. But but Odell played 13 games, finished with 43 receptions for 713 yards, 2 touchdowns from scrimmage. I mean, and then he hadn't really earned any SEC accolades until his junior year. And in his junior year, the LSU Tigers ended up going 10-3 and winning the Outback Bowl under Les Miles. Odell Beckham Jr. in his junior year, he played all 13 games, finished with 59 receptions for 1,152 yards. He finished with 8 touchdowns on the season, and he was soon named to the first team All-ACC. He was a first team All-American, and he won the Paul Hornung Award for wide receivers while playing there, especially while and Jarvis Landry was there too. They were both playing on the same team. That was another thing that people think it's pretty noteworthy. So at LSU, he proven himself a good enough receiver to be taken 12th overall in the 2014 NFL Draft by the New York Giants, a team who had come off another recent Super Bowl, and of course he played under Eli Manning, and that would end up being very, very tough for him, but he would still prove himself as a young wide receiver. His first season in 2014, he started in 11 of the 12 games that he played. He finished with 91 receptions and 1,305 yards in 12 games. He led the league in yards per game with 108 yards per game. He finished with, and even with the rushes, he still finished with 12 total touchdowns on the season. And the Giants that year would go on to they were third in the NFC East. They were 6-10, but Odell Beckham Jr. did earn the NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year for his amazing year. Of course, that catch against the Cowboys went down in history on Monday Night Football, and he was named to his first Pro Bowl out of his 3 consecutive Pro Bowls. In 2015, in his age 23 season, he played all 15 games that he started all 15 games that he played. He finished with 96 receptions and 1,450 yards, which is more receptions and yards than last time, less yards per game. But he still finished with 13 touchdowns on the season, his career high in a season. And the Giants would end up going 6-10 yet again, missed the playoffs completely. But Odell Beckham Jr. was once again named a Pro Bowler. This time he was named to NFL's second team All-Pro for the first time. So I mean, by his second year in the league, he had already been a two-time Pro Bowl, and an offensive rookie of the year, and a second team All Pro player. In 2016, his age 24 year, he started all 16 games he played. He finished with 101 receptions for 1,367 yards, 10 touchdowns on the season. He led the league in yards per touches, 13.5 yards a touch. Like that's what he was doing with New York, and of course, naturally, the Giants actually finished second in the NFC East with an 11-5 record, and they lost in the wild card to the Packers. So I mean, and Eli Manning, like this was the year that Eli Manning won the Walter Payton Man of the Year, because that was a pretty good year for the Giants. And then for the next, so at the end of his first 3 years in New York as a player with Eli Manning as his quarterback, Odell Beckham Jr. was a 3-time Pro Bowler and a two-time second team All Pro wide receiver and an offensive rookie of the year. That's what he had done. And then, of course, the next few years would be kind of difficult. His next year, his age 25 season, he would only play 2 of the 4 games because that season was plagued with injury. He still had 3 touchdowns, and he had 300 yards and 3 touchdowns in the 4 games that he played. In his age 26 season, he started all 12 of the games that he played. He finished with 1,052 yards on 72 receptions, and this is when Eli Manning was at his absolute worst. Bad enough to the point where Odell Beckham Jr., he missed the Pro Bowl. He missed 4 games, naturally. But he demanded a trade out of New York. He was eventually traded to Cleveland. And he was traded to Cleveland last year with Freddie Kitchens after Baker Mayfield's rookie season. After Baker Mayfield won Rookie of the Year, he teamed up with Jarvis Landry, and of course, they had a bunch of other young players there, and I guess they thought their season was bright this year, but this year ended up being a very difficult one for the Cleveland Browns, especially with Odell Beckham Jr. The Browns finished 6-10, finishing 3rd in the AFC North. Odell Beckham Jr. would finish the year starting 15 of the 16 games he played. He finished with 74 receptions for 1,035 yards, 4 touchdowns, and of course the Browns missed the playoffs. So when you look at all of this and look at where Odell Beckham Jr. is right now, he's a 27-year-old, still incredibly elite athlete, playing in a situation that would seem very tough, the first year of all of them playing together with a new coach in a tough division that has the Ravens in it and the Steelers, because the Steelers are always well coached. You have that situation on top of just dealing with the fact that you're finally out of New York, you're in Cleveland. I always give star players the benefit of the doubt in their first season, but I really want to see Odell Beckham Jr. step it up this year because, of course, his last 2 seasons aren't like his first 3 seasons in New York. I think next year is his best chance to remind everyone why he's elite. Because to me, if he doesn't have another elite season this year, I think he's no longer elite. Like I think he will have been a shining star that went out way too early, especially with the career that he's had. I can't speculate what's going to happen with free agency, who the Browns are going to draft, but I do imagine the Browns are going to have a lot more success this year than they did last year, especially with Baker Mayfield and Odell Beckham Jr. getting a little bit more of synchrony, because I guess it is kind of underrated how many really good receivers are actually paired up with a competent quarterback. And Odell Beckham Jr., even though Baker Mayfield won 6 games this last year, I think Odell Beckham Jr. is in a better situation than a lot of other people are in, a lot of other elite receivers. So his career is very interesting to me. I think it was right for him to leave New York. He left maybe a little too early with Saquon, but it was his decision to leave. He thinks he made the right one with Cleveland because they're stacked with a lot of talent, and they very well could be, because it's the NFL. You never know who can win the Super Bowl as long as you make it in the playoffs. It's fair game. So really with all that, it's just to say you never know with Odell Beckham Jr. As of right now, I still consider him a really good elite wide receiver, set up with a newly elite quarterback, a quarterback that could end up being elite someday in his second year of them being together. So I have no idea, but I'm gonna watch. I'm gonna watch a lot of these games and try to see what Odell Beckham Jr. is made of, because I still see the player that was a two-time second team All Pro within his first 3 years and was a Pro Bowler his first 3 years. I still see him as that player. A lot of people don't, and I understand why. It's been 3 years since we've seen that player, but I still think he's in there. And thank you for listening to all 10 minutes of this. I really, really appreciate Odell Beckham Jr. as a player. I think he's really, really good. I think he gets a little too much disrespect, but I think what he's doing has done a more good for football than bad. So I really appreciate it. I wish you all well. I'm just going to sign off by saying peace and look out for my boy Odell Beckham Jr., who's now wearing number 13 and playing wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns. Peace.